So in just a few moments, I'm going to show you a quick video by AOC. It's absolutely brilliant, guys, where Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez lays out in just a few minutes all that she's done in Washington over the past 2 years, 2 short years as a rookie congresswoman, all that she's accomplished. We're going to watch it together, come back, and break it down.
Hey everyone, so I have been seeing progressive officials around the world do this challenge where we try to squeeze in all of the accomplishments from the last 2 years in 2 or 3 minutes. And since I'm coming to the end of my first term in office, I thought we'd try to do the same. So 2 years in 2-ish minutes. So let's set the clock. Let's try to do it. Ready? All right, let's go. This term, we successfully passed legislation to move $5 million to treatment for opioid addiction with funds shifted from the DEA, $10 million in funds to clean up toxic bombardment sites in Vieques, Puerto Rico that were getting people sick. I repealed the Fair Cloth Amendment in the House, which paves the way for the U.S. to build more public housing for the first time in decades. Passed legislation in the House to ban funds going to the transfer of lethal military equipment to Bolivia. Introduced more amendments than 90% of freshman lawmakers in the House. I authored and introduced the Green New Deal with Senator Ed Markey and secured 115 House and Senate co-sponsors on it. Regional versions of the Green New Deal were also adopted by 10 local governments, including the state of New Mexico and cities of Austin, Los Angeles, New York City, Boston, and more. We unveiled the Green New Deal for public housing, which would invest up to $180 billion over 10 years and create up to 250,000 jobs per year nationwide. I authored the Just Society suite of bills, which would modernize the federal poverty standard, make immigrants eligible for social safety programs, require federal contractors to pay $15 an hour, strengthen tenant protections, and ease reentry for formerly incarcerated citizens. I introduced the Loan Shark Prevention Act with Senator Sanders to cap credit card interest rates at 15%. I called for the bailout for taxi cab drivers targeted in predatory lending schemes and sought tougher oversight in New York City taxi medallion lending. We introduced the COVID-19 Funeral Assistance Act, which would help families get up to $10K in funeral expenses who lost loved ones during the pandemic. I co-sponsored 78 pieces of legislation that passed the House, 14 that were signed into law, and that's before we get to our investigations. During committee hearings, my question lines helped pressure Big Pharma into bringing down the price of PrEP to prevent HIV transmission, exposed TransDigm, a defense contractor, into returning $16.1 million in price gouge profits to the public, pressured Facebook to fact-checking political advertising, and exposed Mark Zuckerberg's dinner parties with radical right-wing figures. We got President Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, to state on the record that President Trump was engaging in tax fraud and to name other potential witnesses. We overturned the unjust citizenship question on the census. We stopped the deportation of whistleblowers from the Irwin County Detention Center and traveled to the border to expose abuse of immigrant families in detention and the inhumanity of child separation. I was nominated twice in the Democracy Awards, which was the first time a member of Congress was recognized in 2 categories. At home in the Bronx and Queens, we helped over 1,000 constituents with VA, Social Security, immigration visas, and other federal services, attended over 600 events in the district, hosted 25 town halls, and when our community became the epicenter of the epicenter, we mobilized a full COVID response operation, including 200,000 community check-in calls, 80,000 meals to families in need, 100,000 masks to teachers, small businesses, and essential workers. We organized and launched a homework helpers program and recruited over 11,000 tutors to offer one-on-one help for kids in remote learning, raised $1.25 million for local organizations doing COVID relief, hosted 8 training sessions to teach over 10,000 people how to unionize their workplace, form mutual aid networks and childcare collectives during COVID, and more. We launched a multilingual outreach effort on the census, which brought in over $58 million to our district. On the presidential campaign, I co-chaired the Climate Unity Task Force with Secretary Kerry to help shape President-elect Biden's $2 trillion climate policy. We raised nearly $600,000 for grassroots organizations in Georgia and more than $1.5 million for progressives and swing district Democrats across the country. In my own race, I fended off over $10 million in corporate-backed attacks without taking a single cent from lobbyists, fossil fuel executives, or corporate money. We won, and I was honored to win re-election with nearly 72% of the vote in the highest turnout election that New York 14 has ever seen. Whew, okay, that's not everything we accomplished, but it's still a pretty good list. I ran over, and it would not have been, but none of this would have been possible without you all. Your support, small dollar donations, your organizing. These accomplishments are not mine, they are all of ours. And so I thank you so very much. Happy holidays, and let's keep it going to the next year.
And so what you saw there was a perfect encapsulation. She tried to do it in 2 minutes, but she accomplished too much. So she took 4 to basically go over, here's what I've done, nitty-gritty work in Washington to make the lives of the American working class and the American middle class better. This is what I've done. Here's a quick overview. And I think this is absolutely vital because the media does not cover the vast majority of this. Most of this does not get coverage. And AOC gets a lot of attention, except for Bernie, who ran for president, she gets more attention than almost any other major progressive in the United States. But it's almost always focused on things like culture war or drama. AOC, was on Vanity Fair, so she got attacked for that. AOC suggested that maybe she was going to learn to make her own adobo, so apparently she was boycotting Goya beans. AOC wanted to sell union-made and American-made merchandise on her website, and it was a bit pricier because of that, and so now her tax-the-rich sweatshirts are the height of hypocrisy and of liberal elitism and blah, 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 blah. Tons of coverage on these sorts of things, but actually very little on the nitty-gritty work she's doing in Washington. And as you heard, there's a lot of it. The left needs to do its own promotion because unlike the neoliberal ghouls who will always get free glowing coverage, we have to fight tooth and nail for every little bit of it. And again, they do not want you to know that AOC is a hard legislative worker. They do not want you to know that she's a tough questioner in committee. They don't want you to know that she's been very good, even with limited experience, getting things done, in Washington, including at times with bipartisan consensus. They don't want you to know that because the narrative about AOC and about the rest of the squad and about Bernie as well is that they're Twitter celebrities, they're internet celebrities, they're YouTube celebrities. But when push comes to shove, they're not hard legislative workers like the moderates like Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or moderate Republicans. And when push comes to shove, those moderates are the ones that get the little things done Americans need, while the progressives have their eye in the sky and they're not achieving anything for the most needy Americans. And that's BS. You see these lies still. We talked about it, and everyone's been talking about it in progressive circles. When Stephanie Ruhle tried to ambush Bernie, who's been fighting tooth and nail for $1,200 checks for every working class American. He's even got support from Republican Josh Hawley, another senator. They've been fighting together to get one bill passed. Nothing else. One $1,200 stimulus check to the American working class. And Stephanie Ruhle has the gall to say to him, "Oh, Bernie, you haven't accomplished much in Washington over your years of service. Why should we listen to you about how to get this done?" And all of it's designed to hide progressive accomplishments. So I want more progressives in the US, in Canada, Congress people, premiers, governors to do these sorts of things, to let people know that they are getting it done day to day. We know this. Progressives know this. We know that Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and AOC work incredibly hard in Washington and on behalf of their constituents. That's why they all comfortably won their primaries. But the point is, we need to get that message out to people. Folks like Joe Manchin can't make the point that, AOC is only famous on Twitter or only famous for tweeting, and that's that. We need to let everyone know that AOC is already a rock star when it comes to getting stuff done on the Hill. And let's also be clear. Let's be clear. To the extent that she hasn't gotten even more done, it's because the rest of Congress is awful. Like, this whole debate about why Bernie hasn't gotten more passed, suggesting that he doesn't work hard or suggesting that he doesn't know how to make deals, hides the fact that the people Bernie has to deal with don't care if working class people live or die. Like, at some point, you gotta stand with your principles. And so Bernie can compromise, Bernie can make deals, Bernie can find areas to cooperate, but when it comes to the fundamental human dignity of the American working class, and Bernie doesn't want to compromise, he's not the bad guy. The bipartisan Democratic-Republican consensus is the bad guy. So AOC did a fantastic job here. Thanks to Jacinda Ardern from the Labour Party in New Zealand. I think she started this trend. I want to see all sorts of progressives that are working in politics, from the smallest levels to the biggest levels, doing this to let people know that it's not just on social media, but they are fighting for the working class, nitty-gritty, even when the cameras aren't there.